This presentation is about coiling. Coiling is when you make a bunch of snakes, out of clay of course, and you build with them. This presentation is broken down into 4 parts. Part 1 is making a template. We use this template in order to follow a form that we coil into. Part 2 is making the bottom. Part 3 is coiling and problems, because yes, there are problems. And part 4 is beating it into shape and finishing it. In order to make a template, you're going to need the following supplies: scissors, pencil and an eraser, pen or kind of a marker, that would be probably the best, white plain paper or plain paper, cardboard, like a cereal box cardboard. You want the thin cardboard, nothing too thick, and a ruler. To get started, let's talk about form. Out of these 3 vessel forms, only one is acceptable for the project requirements. Do you know what that is? It's the middle one. It's the middle one because the middle one goes in some spots and comes out in some spots. You are not allowed to have a vessel that is just a straight wall. Even if it goes in one direction, it has to come back out, or vice versa. So your vessel needs to go in and out. The reason for this is so that you can learn to control your form by using a template. There's nothing really to control here or here. But the second that you have to move your coils out and then move your coils back in, you are learning how to control that form. So make sure that your vessel form goes in and out. A few things about vessel shapes. Although all of these shapes look beautiful, they are very hard to do for different reasons. So let me talk you through some of the problems here. This shape is shorter than it is wide, which means it's going to be hard to coil. What's going to happen, these little areas here are going to want to fall down. So if this is the table, this cantilever is super scary. So if you have something like this, I'm not going to talk you out of it. This is a beautiful form if you want to do this. Just know that as you're coiling out this way, this wall is going to want to collapse. And as you start coiling this way, the weight of the wall here is going to want to collapse this and this. So depending on how drastic you go out is going to determine how scary it is or how possible it is for a collapse. Now you can come in here and put your put your props here to prop up your wall. Now in a sense like this, your prop could actually just be a donut that goes around this whole thing, right? So the donut would just kind of go around the whole thing, propping that up. And then if you did have a problem with your inside wall, you can also just put another prop on the inside wall to hold that up while it goes through the kiln. This is very difficult to coil, especially as a beginner. If you have coiling experience and you love this form, go ahead and try. But I wouldn't try this if you have never coiled anything before. The walls are just too weak and they just want to fall over. So this one, kind of the same situation. Even though it is tall, we still have a pretty aggressive outward direction here. And because of that, it's going to want to collapse. So again, you can kind of make your donut through here that's going to go all the way around to actually hold that form in place. So this would be a clay donut through here that's going to hold up that wall right there. This you're probably not going to have a hard time with. This probably is not going to collapse in, but definitely this drastic kind of plunge out this way is going to want this to collapse down. And essentially what ends up happening is you have a plate. So what was like this to begin with ends up being like this. And then you figure out that your base was actually way in here and your wall just kept falling down, falling down. So again, I wouldn't do this if I was a beginner, but if your heart is set on it, you're going to have to take special precautions. Same here, even though we're not starting where you're aggressively going out quickly, if you do something that cantilevers way out like this, you may end up having to put posts here to hold that up. You may also end up, see how flat this is? You may also have to end up putting a post here. Now, probably what you would do in this situation is you would make this part right here separate by using a plaster bowl form. And so you would coil up to here and then put this in a plaster bowl, or put it in a bowl. Make a form out of this. This would be like a molded form to where when it firms up, then you put it on your coils. But you can see that that's an extra step, and that is going to require extra instructions. So again, I wouldn't do something like this at this point when you know clay a little better. This is a perfect form that you can make, but just know you're getting into some trouble if you have a form that looks like that. What do you think the problem is with this guy? Yeah, look how little that is. That is not going to be stable at all. So make sure when you're making your forms that you are actually pulling this down a little bit so you have enough of a base to hold your work up so that it doesn't tip and fall over. So these are just some issues that you may run into if you are doing anything that is more of an aggressive form or a dynamic form. A few things you need to know about your form before you start making the template. First thing, if you have a form that gets really small like this, that whole part from here up is not going to be included in your size requirements. You are not including that in your size requirements. It doesn't take any coiling to get that done. So if you have anything that gets real small like that, you are going to make your template from here down. You can put that in, but your size requirements are going to be this bulk right here. For something that you want to do, like a really interesting, fun rim, you're not going to worry about that rim just yet. You are actually going to go ahead and just coil, or make your template, I should say, that looks like this. That's what your template will look like. You're not going to worry about this, because what you're going to end up doing is coiling all the way to the top of your template. And then once it firms up and gets leather hard, then you're going to cut in to make whatever fun thing you want to do at the top there. So you are disregarding any cuts down into your vessel. Even if you decide that you really want to cut down in here, you are going to do that after you've already coiled following your template. That comes later. When you are drawing the form for your template, you need to keep in mind where your base is going to be. So you see that a lot of these, when I'm drawing them, I'm not really saying like where my base is, but you are going to want to know where your base is, because what you're not wanting is to do something like this, and then you make your template like that, because you don't know where your base is. So if you have a form that looks something like that, figure out where your base is going to go. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to show. If you really want it to look more like this and you don't want that visual foot, that's okay. You still need that there so that you can figure out where what size you're going to cut your base. Now also know that if you do have something like that, your base can't be this tiny little thing, right? Just like the last thing I showed you, that's not going to hold up. You need your base to be substantial enough to hold up the work. And then as you coil, if you want to get rid of that base, you're going to go ahead and kind of start coiling like that. But just know you have to have a visual base right now, at least to make your template. You have to know what that base is. Speaking in terms of how to choose a form for your work, it kind of depends on what type of project you're doing. If you are doing a sgraffito project where you're going to be carving in or scratching the surface, and you're going to tell a story through, the work on the surface, and you know what you want to say already, and you know you need a certain form, like let's say you want to do fish and you want the fish to look like they're in a fish tank, well, then it would make sense to do a form that looks more like this or a form that looks more like that. So, your form does have something to say about your form is going to speak to your audience. So just kind of know that. If you don't really know what you're going to be putting on the surface, don't worry about it at this point because it's kind of fun to react to your form. So if you just love this shape, make this shape. And as you are building it, you're going to start formulating what you want on the surface as you go. So, for something like a sgraffito, I'd go ahead and if you know what you want, great, think about the form now. If you don't, just pick a form that you love and react to it when the time comes. If you're doing something more like a face jug, however, you do need to know what your form is. If it is one of my projects, I've asked you to exaggerate a feature, and so that's going to be really important. Your form is going to dictate what feature you exaggerate. It wouldn't make sense to have really big eyes on a form that is skinny up here, right? If you're going to plan on putting the eyes up here. Instead, you could have little tiny eyes up here, and maybe this one gets an exaggerated mouth, right? That makes sense with the form. This one would be good with exaggerated eyes, right? And maybe this one has just a cute little mouth. This one could have an exaggerated nose. And then it could also have a nice mouth and maybe little eyes up here, okay? This could go either way, right? Especially if you decided to put your eyes way down here. You could kind of make big eyes, and you could make a little mouth, or you could go opposite of that. So just kind of, these are just things to think about when you're thinking about the type of form that you want to make. And again, it does depend on the project that you're doing. And if you are not worried about surface at all, you're just going to have a textured surface or a smooth surface, then that is all form, baby. That is all form. So it's all about making a beautiful form at that point. And that form better be pretty awesome if you're not giving your audience something else to concentrate on. In order to figure out the proportions of your vase and making them fit into the size requirements, I have an example here. Your size requirements may not be 14 inches, but if they aren't, you're just going to kind of figure this sort of situation out based on the example. So if you know that your size requirements are 14 inches, that means the height plus the width has to equal the 14 inches, then this is kind of where you're going to start. You do not have to make a 4-inch wide and a 10-inch tall vase if you're going tall and thin. Understand that. This is just a starting off point, and this is going to make a little more sense when I actually start measuring these things. But just so that you have a basic understanding right now, A is tall and thin. So if your vase is going to be very tall and very thin, you're going to think about a 4-inch wide by a 10-inch tall, and that's going to give you your 14 inches. If your vase or form is short and stout, then you're going to think about 6 inches wide and 8 inches tall. That means 6 inches wide this way, 8 inches tall this way. If your work is going to be wider than tall, and remember, this is the hard one. Be careful about this one, it's hard. Then you're going to go 8 inches wide and 16 or 6 inches tall. And again, those are approximate measurements. This just gets you started so that you know where to begin. The way you're going to get started is you should have had some sketched form. So make sure that you have kind of come in here and you have decided on the form you want to use. Don't worry too much about if it's symmetrical, because we're not worried about that at all. You just want to have some idea of the shape of form you want, where the volume is, right? Kind of where the bottom's going to be, and just sketch out that form. Okay? So I'm going to make this a little bit easier for you to see, and this is where the marker kind of comes in nice for you, so that you can say like, yeah, now that I've got my sketched form, this is what I want it to look like. And really, you just need one side. Don't even worry about going into that side. You just need the one side, because with the template, we are going to be cutting this in half. So just to kind of give you an idea here, we're only going to be using this side. So I know where my bottom is. I know where my top is. Okay? Now, once you decided, yeah, that is the form I want, then you're going to pull back into this sheet and you're going to decide whether your form is short and stout, tall and thin, or wider than tall. Now, I know for sure we are not wider than tall, not happening, but I'd say it's kind of between these two. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with either a 8, 9, or 10 inches tall. I do want it to be tall, so I'm probably going to go ahead and start at 10 inches and see where that gets me. To get your proportions the right way, you're going to start with a fresh piece of paper, and this is where you're going to grab your ruler. I'm only going to be making the one side. So this center line here is essentially going to be this side of the piece of paper. Okay, so I could even take this, if it is easier for you to understand, fold it on that center line, and I'm essentially doing this, except I'm trying to get the right size. So I said I wanted to start at 10 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and I am just going to loosely mark where 10 inches is on my paper. From thinking again that this is my center line. And then I know from my paperwork here that if I'm going 10 inches tall, I'm going to go 4 inches wide. Now, this is really important to understand. 4 inches wide is from here to here. Is not from the center line to the end, right? So I would be taking that 4 inches and dividing it in two, because I'm only taking half of the vessel. That's really important. I know that my volume is somewhere down here, so I know that somewhere through here, I'm going to go ahead and mark 2 inches. So that's the 2-inch mark. Now I can already tell that, just judging from my kind of mock-up here, that this is probably going to be too skinny here. So chances are I am going to probably be more at 9 inches and then maybe like 3 inches here. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and just start sketching. I know that as long as I am within these two marks, I've at least met project requirements. I have a feeling I'm going to be coming a little bit down further here and a little bit out further here. And just knowing that, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start sketching my form. Knowing that my kind of where I want my volume, knowing that I need to keep that little area down here. And so from here, I can start to see that I am not coming in as much here, and I really like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of sketchy sketch, come in a little bit more. I'm probably going to need it to be a little bit shorter. So I'm just sketching at this point. Just sketching and just trying to get my overall form made within the template markings. Okay, so I can say, all right, well, I still want it to come in here a little bit more, widen out more. I'm choosing this shape because when I build it, there are a few things that I'm hoping are going to happen that I can show you how to fix if it happens. So I'm actually going to pull my shape out just a little bit further because I kind of want it to collapse so I can show you that. All right, I think if I go along the sketch lines that I like, this is going to be my shape. Something like that. And before I ever go to the actual cardboard, what's cool here is that I can go ahead and cut this out. And then I can see what that is actually going to look like. Now, because I'm on white, I'm going to go ahead and give you a better idea here of what my form looks like. So I can look at that and say, ooh, yeah, I like it. That looks good. I like it. Or I can say, ooh, gosh, I don't like this here at all. This needs to come in a little bit more. I think I'm going to come in a little bit more. So you can still mess with things, or you can start over again, right? You can start over again. So let's say that for demo reasons, this looks great. I love it. I'm going to get rid of that, and I am going to, well, first I'm going to measure and make sure that I'm meeting my project requirements. So at the end of the day, I'm 9 1/4 tall, and I am 2 1/2 wide, which is going to be 5, right? Which is going to be 5 inches because this is only half of my width. So 5 inches. If you're having trouble kind of understanding that, keep the other side of your template out, line it up at the top there, and then you can go ahead and just measure from one side to the other, and I can see that I'm 5 1/2. Let me do this. I have a line here that I can just line it right up with, and that gives me an idea of where I'm at. So that's 5 inches. Again, that was 2 1/2 this way. 2 1/2 plus 2 1/2 is 5. So I've got my 5 plus 9 1/2. That meets my 14-inch project requirement. 9.25 plus 5 is more than 14 inches. So I am good to go. Now we have the easy part where you're actually going to make your template out of cardboard. Now what I can say about cardboard, again, make sure it's the thin cardboard. French vanilla almond cereal is delicious. And not the thick cardboard that you would like ship anything in. It's too hard to cut, and you just don't need something like that for what we're doing. What's nice about these cereal box cardboards or the cracker box cardboards is that you already have these lines made for you, and we're going to use those lines. So unfortunately mine goes beyond, shoot. Okay. Okay. You see how my line is going beyond this line here, and that's going to give me a problem with this? I don't want that. If I was in a shorter, if I had a shorter work here, I'd probably be able to get away with that. So I am going to go try to find a larger cereal box or a pizza box. Or if you're at the studio, we have lots of different sizes. So I don't want this at all. My work needs to fit inside of my square. And I also don't want my work to go over these lines because it's going to give me a problem when I'm using it to coil with, because it's going to keep wanting to fold. So let me go see what I can find. I found a box that was a little bit bigger, and actually I did cut my top off just a little bit because it's so important that your work fits within the box. I don't have a frozen pizza box right now. Those are really good for the tall and thin ones. Or if you have like the taller cereal boxes, those are really good. But again, what's important is that these flaps here are not, you're not going over any of these bends. You're going to need it. And you're going to need, this is so important, you're going to need about an inch above your top. You're going to need that space up there, and I'm going to show you why, or you're going to figure out why real quick when you go to Coil. But I'm going to go ahead. I've got my template here, or my original mock-up here, and I'm going to go ahead and draw it on. Now I know that my slab at the bottom really is only going to be 1/4 of an inch thick, so I kind of went a little bit overboard here. This is about 1/4 of an inch right here, so I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit more like I want it. I want to come in here a little bit more, and now I know that that's the line I'm going to cut on when I make this. Okay, super important stuff here. Before you ever cut your shape out of the box, you're going to do a few things. This is your positive, right? This is the actual vase. You're going to put POS right there, positive. Here you're going to put negative. Make sure you do not forget to do that, and put it close to this, because you're only going to come about an inch out of your widest area, or the area with most volume, because you don't want this whole template. It was just going to get crazy. Okay. All right. You are cutting this as well. Okay. So my cuts are going to be this line and this line. And then, of course, I'm cutting it off of here. So let me show you what that looks like. I've made my initial cut here. This is the center of my form. Now I'm going to cut out kind of the rectangle that I made. So now I have something like this. Again, I've got about an inch here, and I want to leave about an inch up here. And I'm going to cut my shape out going over. I'm cutting along that top. I am not going straight up. I am cutting along that top. This is what you should have when you are finished. Now, I had you put positive, negative. You also want to put top, top. I can't tell you how important that is, because it's so easy to accidentally put these upside down. It's so easy to accidentally use your negative for the wrong thing. So make sure that you have all of this information. You need all of this information here. I know I don't need my entire top up here, so I'm going to just cut this down a little bit. What's important here is that I know where my center line was. This is going to be so important later. Knowing where that center line is so important, because you don't have it down here, right? Your middle's like right here. So this down here is not your center line. This is just where your wall starts. This is your center line. And as you start to coil, if you start noticing the center of your vessel, this is happening, then you know that something very wrong is happening when you're in the coil process. So I will explain all that kind of as we go, but I just want you to know this is what your work should look like. The positive is going to size the bottom. The negative is what you're going to actually coil into. And of course, this is going to make sense when you watch the coiling video. Voila. In order to make the bottom of your form, you're going to need a rolling pin, a clean sheet or canvas. This time you cannot use newspaper. Sheet or canvas, fettling knife, needle tool, and positive template. First, we're going to make the bottom, because the coil should have something to support it from the bottom. Now with the bottom, we are going to use our template to make sure that the radius of our bottom is going to be correct with the proportion of our actual coil vessel. So you are going to take the positive part of the template. The positive part of the template, that is what's going to make the bottom. So get the other one out of the way. You should have written positive so that you know what is what. Now you can see here that this is really as big as my bottom's going to be. Now remember, I am doubling that. So basically, to kind of give you an idea, this is just going to go around in space, and that's going to give you an idea of how big this is actually going to set in space. Now they do always appear bigger at the end, usually, mostly because maybe you didn't control the form so much. Also, it's just really different looking at something flat than it is something three-dimensional. So this will look a little bit bigger than it actually does now. But what you need to know for now is that for something about this size, my bottom's going to be about that wide, and that's going to be in a radius. So with that, when I go to make my bottom, I really don't need a lot of clay. Like, I don't even need this much clay for what I have to do, but I wanted to show you something, and I need a little bit more clay to show you that. So first things first, you are going to need something that will release. So canvas is your best bet, because I'm going to have to roll this slab out. Give you an idea of what we're doing. I'm rolling a slab out with a rolling pin. You're going to need a canvas. If you don't have canvas, then a sheet will do. And again, like pillowcases are great. Or if you just have an old sheet to cut down, you can cut that down. Canvas is a little better if you happen to have it. So I have my canvas. I have a board. You might be on a counter. If you have access to a slab roller, really, for making something this small, there's no reason to run it through the slab roller. If you're making a really large bottom, that's a little bit different of a story, but it's just not necessary. This is going to take a second. So when I have a bit of clay that is more in a ball form, I'm going to show you how to throw a slab. This is one of my favorite things to do. It's just fun, and I think it's good to know, because there are going to be times where you're going to need to flatten a piece of clay out, and it's just easy to do it this way. Now, I could do this if I had a bunch of clay, just so you have an idea. I'm doing it on a small scale, but even if you had a bunch of clay, you would be able to get a really quick sheet of clay out, because the last thing that we want to do is take a rolling pin right now and start rolling something this thick. First of all, it's going to take forever to get it thin, and also it's just the water is just going to come out of it before you ever get it to where you need it to go. So we're not going to do that. We need to get this into more of a sheet before we actually go to the rolling pin. So that's what I'm doing here. To throw a slab, I'm going to take my clay, and I am going to hold on to my sheet or whatever I have down here, because if I don't, my sheet's probably going to go flying across the table. So I'm going to have a hold on down here. What I'm going to do is I'm almost like a plane landing. My hand is going to be engaged with that clay until it hits the ground, but I am going to lightly be letting it go so that it can stretch, and that's essentially what's happening here. So I'm holding my clay. See how I didn't release my hand, but I kind of released my grip? That's kind of what you're doing, and then you're going to turn it in different ways. You can flip it, and you're just going to keep flipping it around until it starts to flatten out. So you can see it's starting to flatten out. Now, a few things that you don't want to do. That does nothing. So I started at the top and I just went flat straight down. The only thing that did was it kept my middle really high and it kept my edges thin. So it's only stretching out at the sides, and I don't want that. The other thing that you don't want to do is this, where of course it didn't happen, but if you release right here, there we go, it goes flying or it goes rolling. Or if you had a bigger piece of clay, a lot of times it will hit and then roll this way and like fold in half. So make sure that you are engaged with that clay all the way until it hits your surface here. But you're still letting it loose. I'm almost, I'm kind of holding it like this. I don't really have too much going on. And as I go, there's nothing really holding too much onto this clay. and I am letting it stretch. So I'm at an angle. Let me see if I can do this, if this helps. See how I'm at that angle? And now I have a really quick, flat piece of clay. So that can happen really fast. And it's about at this point that I want to start actually rolling my clay out. Now, you would think, oh, come on, I don't need a rolling pin demo. I thought that too once, but after some of the things that I've seen, it's come to my attention that yes, a rolling pin demo is in the need here. So, rolling pins. First off, you need a non-stick surface. You cannot roll out on wood or granite or anything like that. You need something in between. So just know that. When you're using a rolling pin, you are not like starting up here and just smashing in at your clay, okay? When you do that, it leaves these dents here, and you don't want those, right? So make sure you're not doing that. What you actually want to do is start from the center. I'm going to actually get rid of this. Start from the center and roll to the edge and roll back to the edge. Do not roll off the edge, because when you roll off the edge, look at what you do. You flatten that way too flat, and again, we want to stay around 1/4 of an inch. So don't roll off your edge. You are just simply rolling to the edge, okay? Once you've done a few passes on one side, you are going to need to pull it up to release it from your canvas or your sheet, because it's sticking to the sheet. When it sticks, it won't grow anymore. You could roll it until the cows come home and you're not doing anything because it's stuck and it won't stretch anymore. So you're going to want to, you do a few passes, turn it over and start again. And I'm literally just doing a few in 2 directions, and then I'll pull it back up and I will flip it around again. You really want to get in the habit of rolling in a few different directions, because that is going to take your particles and kind of pull them in a few different ways. Now, my slab is way too big for what I actually need here, but that's okay. I wanted to show you how to do that. One thing I want to remind you of is, if you're not sure how thick your slab is, remember you can take that needle tool. You can choose a spot that's closer to the center. Don't choose a spot way out here, but you can take that needle tool, press it into the clay, take your finger until it hits the clay, right? My needle tool's all the way to the board. Take my finger till it hits the clay, and then pull it out, and now I know how thick my slab is, and that is actually perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Another thing I do want to show you, though, I'm going to take my metal rib so that you can see this a little bit easier. Okay. You probably are having trouble seeing this, but I do want to go through this quickly right now, just fast. There is actually an air bubble here. You can tell when there's an air bubble because it looks like an air bubble, right? Usually you see them when you are ribbing with a smooth metal rib, but it just looks like just like a little puff right there in my clay. In order to get rid of an air bubble, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle tool, and from the side, so I'm just going to say this is my air bubble here so that you have a visual of where that is. So I am going to, sorry about the sun here. I have a window right there, and in the morning it's pretty bad. I'm going to take my needle tool at an angle, and if my air bubble is right here, I'm going to come at this angle and start just kind of making a few holes, and then press the air out those holes. And that's going to get rid of your air bubble. You don't really want to take your needle tool and go straight in, because what that essentially does is, yeah, your needle tool goes in, but it's pulling the clay in as well. And so instead of having one air bubble, you end up having like multiple air bubbles, because it's not really letting the air out. It's like sealing the hole around the needle tool instead of opening a hole for the air to be pressed out of. So I just, I'll probably mention that again at some other time, but, I think it's important to know that you don't want air bubbles, because if the kiln fires a little too fast, you are going to blow up. So I have my really way too big slab, and I have my positive template. Now I'm going to take the bottom. This is why we did top, because how many times has this happened? Oh, it's happened. And although these are about the same, and it probably isn't going to matter as much here, when the template's way different from one side to the other, and you use the wrong bottom, it's going to be a huge problem, huge. So again, I've labeled top, I've labeled positive, and I am ready to actually make my bottom. What I'm going to do first is somewhere in the center of my slab here, I'm going to put a V. I am gently pressing my bottom in. I am not going very far, because if I go too far, I'm going to cut it in half. The reason that I'm making this V shape is so now I know where my middle is, and that's going to be important because I'm going to use that middle to continue to press this in. This makes it to where I don't have to do math, right? I don't have to do math. Now I know that the radius of my bottom, and I didn't have to mathematically do it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a needle tool and I'm going to sketch around my bottom. Now, as I do this, I just want to show I am not going straight. I'm not connecting the dots straight, because that is not going to make a round bottom. I'm kind of arching from dot to dot. And yeah, I do want to sketch this out before I actually go cut, just in case I make a mistake or something looks really weird. These bottoms don't have to be perfect, right? But they should be a circle anyway. You should at least have that. So I feel pretty confident that my bottom is good to go. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my fettling knife and I'm going to cut my bottom out. Remember, with that fettling knife, you are slicing. You are not seesawing back and forth. There's my bottom, and if you're having trouble getting it out, what you can do is just make a slice and remove the clay around it. And now you have your bottom. Now, do you see all those, I want to call it an asterisk. Do you see all those lines in there? You are going to go ahead and get those out now, because as you coil, you might forget about it, or it gets too hard, or it's like way in if you end up having that inside. And really, it looks unprofessional, right? Nobody wants to see your asterisks, right? They don't want to see it. So go ahead and get those lines out so that you are actually starting from a bottom that looks like this. Now, hopefully your bottom is bigger than this. Again, I've done a few things here with my example because I'm hoping a few things happen so that I can show you how to fix them. Your bottom should be a little bit bigger than this. Just hoping, just kind of thinking ahead, a little bit bigger than this is going to be better for you. So that is how you make the bottom. Now, if you are like, okay, I've made my bottom, but I am just not ready to start coiling yet, the last thing that you want to do is put your bottom, even if there's a sheet in between, on a piece of wood and wrap it up. This tiny little thin slab, if you do that, even if it's wrapped in plastic, the way that I tell you to wrap it in plastic, the wood of your board is going to suck the life out of this. And the next time you come, it's going to be a hockey puck and not a nice malleable piece of clay. So if you're going to do something like that, just to make sure that you have plastic down, and then you can have the sheet and kind of wrap it up like that. Don't let a tiny thin sheet of clay like this go directly on a board, even if there is a sheet in between. Bad news. Now, once you start putting the coils on it, the coils kind of start keeping things moist in there, and you actually want your work to start firming up a little bit, because you're going to notice as you coil, You can only coil so far before you have to stop because things are wobbly and they need to firm up. So there is going to be a point where even if you had plastic down first, you're going to want to get rid of that plastic. And I will, hopefully, if I remember, I will talk about that again when we get there. So your bottom is ready for the coiling to begin. To build your vessel form, you're going to need knife, serrated rib, slip and score, and your negative template. The negative template. Negative. Making coils. It's kind of up to you whether you want to make a bunch of coils at once and put them in plastic, or if you want to make one coil at a time. And I'll talk about how to deal with both of those things. Right now, let's start with how to make a coil. Now, when you are working with coils, you do not want to roll your coil out on sheets or canvas. You do not. My table is actually glass, and if I wasn't doing a demo, I'd actually be working on the glass. If you've got a granite, that's fine. This is wood. The wood's going to suck out some of my water, but we want to keep these wet. And that's going to be the biggest problem, at least at the beginning, is that you're working too long on your coils and they're becoming way too dry, way too fast. So let me show you a few things here. First of all, you are not in a race or a competition to get the biggest, longest coil, especially right now. Believe me, at the end of this, you are going to know how to make a coil quickly and beautifully and long, right? Right now, we don't care about that. So just don't start with this much clay. You're wasting your time because it's going to take too long to get there. It's going to dry out too much, and then you're going to have to start over. So let's not do that. Let's start with something more manageable like this. And before you ever start to coil, you want to try to kind of get it small enough that it's manageable. Starting with something this wide, girthy, is too much. It's just too much. Start with something like this. Now, to coil, you want to make sure there's nothing in front of you, okay? Don't put stuff here because it doesn't give you space to actually coil. You are going to have a nice long runway again in front of you. You are going to use from your fingertips all the way back. I even go up my wrist. You're using one hand, and you are going to use moderate pressure. And you are basically going to start on one side and just roll back and forth. So notice how I'm not getting stuck by anything here, because what you don't want is this. If you're doing this, you're never going to get the coil nice and rolled out. Nothing's really happening. It's not stretching. You're also, by going back and forth like this really quickly, you're ruining the integrity of the inside of that coil, and you don't want to do that. So nice, long from the fingertip all the way back to the wrist. And if you can't get from the fingertip all the way back to the wrist because something is in the way, you need to move that out of the way. And I'm just going back and forth until I have a coil that is 1/4 of an inch, right? 1/4 of an inch is what we're going for with our coils. Okay, so I think that this is looking like a pretty darn good coil, okay? And this is about 1/4 of an inch. I don't know, I'm gonna have to think about what I can say that looks like not on TV. So I'll think about that for a minute. Anyway, here is your coil. And you can, if you're gonna make a bunch of coils at once, you're gonna put them in plastic. I'll show you how to do that in a minute, but first, I want to show you about a few problems. So again, starting with something like this, it's going to take you forever to get it thin. Don't do it. Make sure you start with a thinner snake. Now, some of the biggest problems that you're going to face with coiling Too much pressure. You're in clay in general, in clay, timing and pressure. Oh my gosh. Timing, pressure, and compression are like the three biggest things. How much you press down and how fast you roll is going to determine the shape of this thing, right? If I'm pressing down too much, I'm going to do this on purpose so that you can hear. I'm going to get a really oblong, not round coil. And when you can hear this, you know that you've done it wrong. Ready? Hear that? When you hear that, it's bad. You need to deal with it. And the way that if you don't deal with it, it's never going to be round, right? When you hear that, if it's oblong, you will never get it round again. You have to deal with it. And the quicker that you deal with it, the better. So don't just be like, oh, haha, I'm making that noise and I'm not going to do anything about it because that teacher, she doesn't know anything. I'm telling you, it's not going to be good. What you want to do is where it is oblong, you kind of pull that on gosh, I don't know how to explain that. You pull it up so that it's tall. How about that? You pull it up so that it's tall, and essentially you're turning it into a cube. So you're gonna press down to where it is just as thick this way as it is this way. And you may have, like through your whole coil, there may be different areas that need different amounts of pressure. So just consider like, okay, you're trying to just make a cube out of it. That way, that's going to be as close to round as you're going to get when you start actually rolling again. Now, when you start rolling again, you want to have pretty light pressure at first because you're trying to get those edges off of that cube that you just made. And if you still hear it knock after you've done a few of these, you need to stop again and figure out where those high points are and kind of knock it back into place. And then once you don't hear that knocking anymore, you can go ahead and continue with your coil. Okay, voila, again. Now, let's say you just didn't do it. You weren't listening and you didn't do it. What's going to essentially happen, do you see what is happening to your coil? It's not good. And what's happening on the inside is this back and forth, and it actually ends up, the fibers inside of this coil start pulling apart. So if you cut this in half, you don't even have clay in there anymore. It's just these strands that have been ripped apart. So it's real important that you don't do that. And some of you guys, you know, as beginners, you may have coils that kind of look like this, you know, where they go in or whatever. You're just probably not going to use that really weird part, and it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead and get rid of that weird part. Save the smaller parts. You might need them. This is probably not going to be very good to use. So just kind of know that it's been knocked around a little bit too hard. The other thing I want to say, I'm going to see if I can get away with it here. If you are rolling and you've been rolling for too long and you start to see these surface cracks on it, that means it's getting too dry. And again, these have to be wet. And again, that's because you're taking too long. You are so much better off making short coils like this. And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but you're better off making short coils like this than trying to make these super duper long coils. Because again, eventually you're gonna make long coils. So don't worry too much about trying to get this super long. I'm trying to see if I can get this to crack a little bit, and of course I can't. Okay, okay, here we go. All right, you see those surface cracks? I don't think you can see them. The sun is in the way. You see those surface cracks? That's when you know that the work is getting too dry. Now at this point, you can still use this coil. It's not totally dead yet, but you don't want that. If you keep seeing that, it's because you're taking too long. Start with less clay If you have a weird area that is just really not working out, get rid of it. Don't keep trying to coil with it. Just get rid of it, and then keep going. Now, you can see here that bottom coil is way too small. If you start coiling at this point anyway with a coil that's that small, your walls are going to collapse. I'm telling you right now, your walls are going to collapse because you don't really know how to work with this clay yet. Now, you may know people, or you may have seen, especially artists that work in porcelain, that they're working with coils this small. It's not that you can't work with a coil this small eventually, but if you are a beginner, don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to me, because I don't want to mop up your tears. Make sure that you are at 1/4 of an inch with this coil. And 1/4 of an inch, I would say, maybe fettling knife. Yeah, maybe like the silver part of your fettling knife would be a good indicator of what 1/4 of an inch or how big your coil should be. Also, I mean, all of our hands are kind of different sizes, but you know, my fingers are about the size of my coil. So just try to do your best of figuring out how big these actually need to be. Now, if you're going to go one by one, then you can go ahead, roll your coil, and put it on. But if you think that you want to just make a bunch of coils first and then start building, you can do that, but make sure that you have plastic down first, and then your coil, and you are not letting them dry up at all. So they should be totally wrapped like that while you make your other coil, and then when that coil's done, you can go ahead and put it in there with it. It is so important that these stay wet. I wouldn't go too far. You know, I think 10 is good. Make 10 coils. Go ahead and build. There's going to be a point where the work, you have to stop building anyway, and at that point you can always make more coils. As long as they are wrapped up in plastic really good, even those 10 coils that you make, you could probably still have for later. So as long as you are wrapping those up really good. That's how to make a coil. Now let's talk about how to build with them. I'm ready to start building my vessel with coils. Let's start with what we're going to build on and how we're going to do this. First of all, you are going to want a wear board at this point because you're going to be turning this around a lot. So you do want some kind of board, knowing that, you know, if my vessel's only this big and I know that I'm only going to be this big at the most at any time, I don't want a huge board. They just get in the way. So the smallest board that you can find that works with what you're doing, the better. This is even probably big, but I'm okay. I'm okay with this. Now, I never want to just work right on the board, right? What do we want between the work and the board? Either a sheet of newspaper or a sheet of a cloth. Now, look how big this cloth is. If I'm constantly going like this, which is what I'm going to be doing when I'm coiling, all of this is really getting in my way. So make sure that if you are using newspaper, that you're folding it up, that you don't have it spilled out all over the place. And if you are using a sheet, you know, get it under control. This is probably not the size I would ever choose for this, but as long as it's kind of within my board and it's not hanging out, I feel good about that. So now I am ready to start working. If you're in a studio situation, there are probably turntables there. This is the one technique of clay that, man, those turntables sure are nice. If you're at home and you have a Lazy Susan, put it to work. But it is nice to have this, and you will see why here once we get started. Now, for the first coil, if you have let your bottom firm up at all, of course you're going to slip and score. Always, right? You're always going to slip and score. If your bottom is still really wet, then you don't have to. It's going to stick right to it. Now, I don't mean to brag about my big, huge, very nice looking smooth coil, but you know, pretty soon you'll be able to do this. Now, starting with something this big is ridiculous. And what you're not going to do is just coil up like this, right? You're going to be doing one coil at a time. So because this is so small, I'm going to save my big coils for later. And I'm going to go ahead and grab just a normal size coil. There's really no reason to ever get a coil that big, but okay, normal size coil. The first thing I'm going to do is just coil right on top of that bottom. So I'm right on top. I really want to make sure that my wall and my bottom have a good start. So even if I don't want this visual bottom, I'm going to deal with that a little bit later, but I want to make sure that this is right on top. Now, there are steps about coiling that, because we're following a template, it's really important that you follow. Once you've coiled for a long time, or if you're free flowing, these steps aren't quite as important, but what I'm about to tell you is very important with the template. Now, first things first, this is kind of where my seam was, so I'll probably start on the opposite side of that. I am going to press down. I want to make sure that these two parts are adhered together, so I'm pressing down. I am not flattening that completely out. I want to be clear about that. You are not pressing so hard that this coil becomes a pancake. I'm just pressing down to where I have a flat top, and I've created a bulge here. That bulge is important because that is what I'm actually going to pull down. I am only pulling the bulge. I am not pulling the top. I'm not coming up here and pulling down. I am only pulling the bulge. Only pulling the bulge. I'm going to do that on the outside and the inside. And if I'm only pulling that bulge on the inside, got to get out of the sun here. Okay, I can't get out of the sun anymore. Okay, I guess that's that. Sorry, guys. So you're pulling that bulge from the inside as well. And what you should have left is a 1/4 inch face to put your next coil on. If you don't have anything left and yours looks like that, it means that you've pinched or you have pulled from the top and you did not pull from the bulge. You have to have that bulge there to pull down. And before you ever put your next coil on, you have to make sure that you have a surface to put the coil on. So after I've gotten my first coil on, then I can pull out my template. Now, remember, we used the positive for the bottom to size the bottom. Now we are getting rid of that thing. Do not put it away. Keep it, but put it away. Now you're using the negative because this is what you're going to use to start controlling your form as you coil. I know that my first coil is going to come out a tiny little step. Now, general rule of thumb, your coil is never, let me draw this out, your coil is never going to be more than halfway off. Half of your coil should always be on there. So even if I had a really drastic out, I'm gonna stretch that later. In order to build though, I am going to have it halfway. So I kind of know that if I start halfway, I will probably be okay with my template. Now, for your template, you are always trying to stay about 1/8 inch from your template, because I guarantee that as you're pushing down, you're going to end up stretching towards your template. So never go right up against your template. Always leave a little bit of room between the work and the template. And I pretty much know that if I just put this on a little bit out, I'm going to be okay. Now I'm starting to fall out this way, right? My coils are going to start building out this way. It's going to be really important that while I am pressing down, that I am pressing up or at least supporting up with my other hand. That way, I'm not collapsing my wall. I want to make sure that I am keeping that coil exactly where I placed it. So I'm almost pushing in with my outside hand, and I'm pushing down with my inside hand. Okay. And so again, I have my flat top, and I have my bulge that I'm going to pull on the outside and on the inside. Notice you can even see where I'm not touching even the corner of that coil. I'm only dealing with that bulge. I am not coming up here and pulling down. I'm only pulling down on the bulge. Only pulling down on the bulge. On the inside, same thing. I'm only pulling at the bulge. I am not touching my top. I try to make this so clear, and there are always people that don't do it, and it's just one of the most important things in this process. Okay, so now I can see that my next coil is going to step out one more. I'm going to stay halfway on. And now I'm really going to start using my template. What you want to do is always kind of look where you're seeing this profile. That's going to be really important. So when you're working low, you're always way down here, right? Crouching down in. But I want to kind of come around here, and once I get going, I'm going to start actually placing my coil where it needs to go. I'm still pretty small down here. So really, I probably don't need to go this drastically just yet, but you will, and it's really important that you know that you're doing that from the beginning. From the beginning. Okay. Now, again, I'm really kind of starting to fall out here, so my outside hand is pushing up and in a little bit. It's not letting that coil move out of the place that I just placed it. Nice and firm. And I'm going to go around. It's easier for me to stand. And I'm going to place that coil on. Pulling down only the bulge. Right now, this is small enough that I can still hold it in my hand. There's going to be a point you're not going to have that option. Pulling the bulge on the inside. Right now, it's easier for me to pull down. You may run into a situation where you have to pull the bulge up. That's okay. It's okay as long as things are working out. Okay, now I'm looking really good here. I'm still about 1/8 of an inch. I'm also always looking kind of at the coil below, because the coil I just put on is going to be a little bit further away than the coil below, because when I put my next coil on, it's going to actually push this one down a little bit. So I know, again, I'm looking at that 1/8 of an inch, and I want to make sure I'm staying in that 1/8 of an inch range as I go around. And if something doesn't look right at this point, I can go ahead and shape a little bit. If something's falling out too much, I can pull it back in. At this point, you're not doing any drastic adjustments. It should just be little bits here and there. I am going to talk about when things go badly. That'll come up here in a little bit. But I want to say that if you were having to step in, your profile was going in, you would just, of course, take the coils and put them stepping in, right? Same thing. The other thing I want to say is, as you're coiling, make sure that you're not pinching. You will notice that I have one hand on one side and one hand on the other. The second that you start putting the same hand on both sides of the wall, you are going to start pinching. Now, you may see people that have done this for a while do that, but as a beginner, just don't. I already know that if I'm doing this, I already know I'm not pinching because I know how to handle clay and I know how to do it. But as a beginner, you may be in here pinching your wall. And if you start pinching as you are pulling your stuff down, that wall is, when you pinch, the clay stretches. When the clay stretches, it's going to start falling. okay? Don't pinch your wall. Keep one hand on one side, keep the other hand on the other, and as long as you're doing that, you have there's less opportunity for you to pinch. So you're less likely to pinch if you are keeping one hand on one side and one on the other. Do not pinch. Do not pinch. You don't want to do that. You're going to lose your form so fast. So I'm going to put quite a few coils on here, and then I'll get back with you with a few things that I want to talk to you about as you go. So if you want to start putting your coils on before you watch the next steps, go ahead. But you might want to go ahead and watch and see where this goes so that I can tell you what to look out for. Now that I've gotten to this point, I've done a few things here to show you how to fix problems, and I want to discuss a few other things that are really important. First off, all of this nasty on here on my surface is okay. Leave it. I know some of you are like super perfectionist, which it's not even a perfectionist thing. You're wasting your time. You are completely wasting your time when you're going in here and making sure that everything is super smooth and perfect. It is going to take me 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes when this is done to make this look really good at the surface without having to worry so much about it now. So do not leave it. Leave all that stuff there. Now, what I do want to say now is that when my template starts to move in, and I get toward the top here, I do want to get inside and at least clean my inside, because there's a point where I'm not going to be able to get my hand back in there. But for right now, leave it, because you could have an issue that you either have to take stuff off or you have to cut into this, and then you're making a mess again. So just don't go crazy. Look at how bad that looks. I'm going to make this look so good, and you're going to see that at the end here. So leave it. I know it's hard, but leave it. Maybe find the beauty in that texture. I don't know. Okay, so that's one thing. Leave it. The other thing that I want to show you that has happened here that I did on purpose for demo reasons, when you're going around, you should kind of be going around every inch, and I'm going to show you that once I fix this, but when you should be using this template and really controlling your form by this template. Now, what you need to start looking out for from the beginning, I've done this on purpose because I want to show you, but from the beginning you should be recognizing a few things. This tab down here should be within a pinky of the bottom where you started. So do you see that right now, how far away, I don't know if you can see that or not, how far away my tab is from the bottom? That's a problem. So when you start to see your template move away this way, because it's touching here, but it's this far away here, you've got a problem. The reason we left this little tab here is so that you could see where the center is. Now I am seeing that if I were to take something straight, where my center is, that I'm about a ½ inch away from my center. So I'm having a trouble here. I'm having a problem, right? I'm getting into some trouble, and it's because I'm starting to plate out. That is happening because as I'm pushing down, I don't know if you can see this. Let me try to get a good angle here. As I'm pushing down, every coil gets pushed down out a little bit too far, because I'm not supporting and pushing back. So every coil, if every coil moves a 1/16 of an inch, 1/16 plus 1/16 plus 1/16 plus 1, it is going to start falling out. This is going to happen to at least 30% of you. At least 30% of you are not going to control your form because you don't have the counter pressure, and as a result, it's going to touch here and it's going to be really far away down here. You didn't control your form. When that happens, usually it's about this high that you start recognizing like, oh my gosh, I really did something wrong. When this happens while it's still wet, you can fix it. What I would recommend is that you at least get this many, you get it to about this high before you wrap it up and start again next time. So try to get to something like this. That way, while it's still wet, if you are having an issue like this, you can fix it. It's wet. And let me show you how you're gonna fix it. I know that when I'm looking at it kind of from these angles, I'm kind of down low here, I'm not too far off. I'm getting pretty far off in some areas and not as far off in other areas. I'm going to cut my rim in 4 places. How dramatically you need to pull it back up is going to depend on how far you need to cut how far you need to cut in. I don't have to go that far, so I'm cutting in about 1/2 inch. I'm going to do that in about 4 places. And then because it's wet, this is only because it's wet, I'm going to pull it apart and I'm going to overlap a little bit. I'm not going to smush anything yet. So I'm pulling it apart and just overlapping a little bit. Pull apart, overlap a little bit. Pull apart, overlap a little bit. And now that I've overlapped, I can come in here and see, did that do the trick? Oh man, it sure did. Not bad. If I'm within a pinky, I'm pretty good because I'll be able to beat this into shape at that point. No beating while it's wet. I'm going to talk about that again, but right now you see how I've pulled this back up. Now, I am not pinching these seams. Really important. I'm not pinching these seams. Instead, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to smear them. I'm smearing them on the inside and I'm smearing them on the outside. If you pinch, you are just stretching the clay, and as a result, all the work that you just did is going to fall back out. So don't pinch. You are just pulling those seams and meshing them together. And now I'm in a position where I can go ahead and go around, and I'm still a little bit off. I can kind of come in here now and just start forming. Now, because my clay is still a little wet, when I push one side in, another side falls out. So you're really not going to be able to do too much of this right now, but it's close enough that you are going to be able to beat it once it gets to leather hard. And pretty much when you come to this again, that's when you're going to want to beat the bottom. I definitely have a bigger issue on this side, and I'm hoping that once I beat, I'll be able to deal with my issues there. Okay, now, let's say you didn't realize that was happening and you let this firm up. Not good, but let's just say you let it firm up and you're ready to start putting more coils on, and you've noticed that this is way out here and your middle is way off center. If that's the case, you can still fix it because this still should be malleable. But instead of making a slit and overlapping, you're actually going to cut a dart out. This is also too if yours went way out. But if you cut clay away, then you can, this gets kind of funny, you're going to slip and score that area. You're going to take wet clay in a wedge shape. So I've got a little wedge shape here, and I'm going to go ahead and stick that in, and then you can press it together. Press it together. Now, if you can let that, maybe not at the top, but let that firm up on the outside and the inside and press it in when that firms up a little bit. But that's the other way of doing it if it's not really wet. Because remember, wet on wet, you can just smear together, but the second it starts to firm up, you don't have that option anymore. That's when you're going to have to get some wet clay in between there. So that's how you fix if it goes out. Now, mine was already fixed, and you can see that when I put that wedge in, that it actually ended up making my work go in like this. Which, if that's what you need, that's great. That's not what I needed, but, you know, demo. So you're just gonna know that that wasn't me. That was me for you. That's gonna be how you fix things plating out. Now, here we go. Oh, look at me. I've got 4 coils on here. 4 coils. Do you think it still should be this low after 4 coils? Probably not. So let's say I'm down here and I'm like, yeah, but I'm totally, like, I'm following it. It looks great. Like everything is following my template. I don't see a problem here. And you just keep adding your coils on. And you keep adding the coils on. And you keep following your template. But it's not growing up. And then you notice, look at where your center is. Your center is way over here. That's way off. Look at that. Way, way off, right? What did you do? What did you do? This is why it's so important, because you'll think you're following, but this is why it's so important that you continuously look at that center. Because what you have done is every coil that you've put on, you kept collapsing it, and then you'd put the next one on, and the coil below it would fall all the way to the floor. And what happens is, look at this. This right here was the initial patty that I made. This was the initial bottom. But look, now everything touches the ground or the table all the way out here because you kept collapsing coils down when you were putting coils on. You don't want this. If this happens, you have to start over. This is not going to be a wedge thing. If this happens, you have to start over. So this is really plating out. You don't want this, and this is why it's so important to make sure that you are looking at that tab. That's why it's so important to have that tab, because without that tab there, you have no idea where your center is. None. You have no idea where your center is. So really important, so important. All right, yeah, this happens, you're starting over. And you know, the other thing too, like you could say, well, I'm just gonna keep on going. If you keep on going like this, you'll be okay. But what's gonna happen is you're not gonna have this shape anymore. What's gonna happen is you're gonna have a very short and stout profile. It's not going to be tall anymore, and it's going to take you twice as long to coil because now you're starting way out here, and this is going to end up being like way out here. So be careful about that. This is a huge problem, and hopefully you will not have that. The biggest thing is that you're watching, and making sure that you are good to go. Now, I want to talk about this again. Once you have fixed it, go ahead and put another coil on before you let it firm up anymore, just so that you've got those coils nice and adhered to that. Let's say I'm done for the day. I'm going to let this firm up because maybe yours is getting wobbly, especially the more out like this you go, the sooner that you're going to have to stop and let it firm up. If those walls are like, you have to stop and let it firm up. The more upright your work is, you could potentially build it all the way. But if your work is going out or if it's drastically turning in, those points you're going to have to slow down and let things firm up to about leather hard, soft leather hard, I would say. Now, so when you come back to this, you are at a soft leather hard, right? Or you've at least let it firm up. So when you do that, yes, you need to slip and score. Yes, yes, yes. Notice I'm not drowning my seam in score and slip. But you do have to slip and score that first. And you know, I would say just a good rule of thumb, if you leave it for even a half hour, slip and score it. Why take the chance? because that is going to be where it breaks or where it cracks if you don't. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about was your coil. Ah, shoot. Now that I went, we're going to pretend. Okay. Now, your coils. I'm going to use my template, and I'm starting to step in now. I'm going to use it about every inch. And I'm going to lay my coil on that rim about 1/8 of an inch from where it touches. I got a big problem there because of my learning for you guys. This is way too far out. So you're just going to come in here, and every little inch, you're going to place that coil. Don't place it on one side and then think that you have it everywhere else, right? Especially if you're starting to get a little oblong or a little weird. So my coil looks great, but we're going to do this a little more drastically. But oh no, I don't have, my coil's not long enough. That's okay. And this can happen way down here too. If you don't have a long coil, or if you're starting to get these smaller parts that you'd cut off of an end, that's okay. You can go ahead and bridge your coil. So when I say bridge, I mean I'm not butting up because I don't want that seam there. I'm actually overlapping, okay? I'm overlapping that coil. And just to reiterate, you are going to have pressure on the outside. Now that you're starting to step in, your pressure for collapsing is going to be more on the inside, right? So basically, whatever you need to do to hold that coil in place is what you're doing. And then, of course, you are only going to pull the bulge. You should always have a bulge that you're pulling down. And you should always have pressure and counter pressure. So I'm going to try to do something here. Of course. Now, see how I was pinching? Don't do that. Have one on the inside and one on the outside. There may be a time where when you start to kind of come in that you're going to have to do a little bit more of one hand on each side. Hopefully by then you know how to use this clay. I know how to do it without pinching. The biggest thing is that you're not pinching. That you're just going to lose your form so fast. So fast. Okay. All right, so I still have that nice 1/4 of an inch face for my next coil. But one thing I wanted to show you that hopefully happened here. Okay, let's say through here. Let's say through here. If you can still see your seam, that means you are not digging enough. You should be completely, this is what your surface should look like. But if you can see a seam like this, that is not adhered, and that may crack open later. So if that's happening to you a lot, I am almost using my finger and digging. I'm almost digging at that seam. When I have that bulge, my bulge is gone right now, but when I have that bulge, I'm like pulling it and digging. Okay, so that I'm making sure that my seam is nice and smeared together. Now, when you first slip and score, the seam is always it's hard because it's slippery, right? So you're trying to dig and your thumb is like, whee, it just flies off. So sometimes I'll let that first coil, I won't really dig too much until later because it's hard for me to do that. Another thing I wanted to mention is tools. If you are having problems digging, or if you have fingernails, which is just not, fingernails and clay do not belong together. They're just a really bad couple. But you can also use your wooden modeling tool to kind of get in here and pull if you feel like you need to use that tool. I personally can't stand using this tool, but I know some people that exclusively will use their wooden modeling tool to actually come in here and press their coils or smear their coils together. To form and finish your work, you're going to need a fettling knife, your scoring tool and your slip, all of your cleanup tools, so the clay shredder, serrated rib, metal rib, the smooth one, sponge, rubber rib, paddle to beat it, and then of course your negative template. At this point, my form is firm-ish, like soft leather hard, if that. I was still able to get in with my hand through the top, and I have put on a coil at the bottom. So my bottom was a little small, and I didn't want a visual bottom, so I just slipped and scored around there, and I just put a coil just on the outside around the bottom, and I blended that in. So I fixed my bottom while I can, right? Because right now I can even put this on its rim here, and I can come in and do whatever I need to do with my bottom. Now the size of this is very small, so I'm not worried about like completely cleaning up my bottom right now because I'll be able to handle this later. But if I was making something really big, I would at this point, while I can still get at the bottom, I would definitely come in here and go through all of my cleanup stages at the bottom. I definitely want to do that. The other thing that is always nice to do at the bottom is dent it in just a little bit. So I usually just use the palm of my, or the heel of my hand, I should say. And I just take that in a little bit. You can do it with your thumb if it's still malleable enough. That way, you're less likely for that bottom in the kiln to pop out, because sometimes, not much, it rarely happens, but sometimes something flat will pop out. And when that does, your work becomes really rocky because your bottom ended up popping out. So while you can, get in there and just gently push your bottom in. And you can see I didn't go very far with that. But my bottom, for now, I think my bottom is looking good. It's how I want it to be. I took away my sheet only for demo purposes because it's kind of hard to see the form with the sheet in the way. So my bottom's looking good. Once I did my bottom, that is when I got in here with this template, and I started, like every second, I started coming in. Anywhere that I would see light coming through my template, I would come in and stretch that area. I would beat in where it needed to come in, like where the template was touching too much. I would stretch it in. And now if I go around here, there's a little problem spot right there. So I could still come in and work on that spot by stretching it out a little bit. But you catch my drift. Again, my mom. I've gone around and I've just made sure that my template and my work are the same. There are a few spots I'm going to still come in here and work on, but I just want you to see that we're looking pretty circular, pretty symmetrical, I should say, and that's what you're going for. Now, you've also may notice that I have come in here with my serrated rib as well. I did that because everything is still kind of wet down here. Again, maybe soft leather hard. And I want to serrate while my work is soft leather hard because it's easier. That's when I can fill in all the dents. So remember that with the rib, you're pulling from high points and pressing into low points. So I'm getting rid of any dent that I had. And it also, all those finger marks that I had in the way, I needed those to be smoothed out and gone so that I could really get in here with my template and use that. Now, really, I kind of beat a little bit first and then I serrated, and now I'm kind of doing the fine tuning while I can still get in here and stretch and beat. So the serrated rib at this point is you want to get in here, down here. The other thing that's going to happen is now that this is firm, I still have work to do up here. All of this is going to be wet clay up here. By the time I get back down to my bottom, it's going to be too dry to serrate it. Like it's harder to serrate it when things are dry. So I'd rather get this somewhat going. It's not finished yet, but at least I've got it going, and then I'll continue to carry on as I go up here. Another thing to consider, if this is really starting to firm up, make sure that, again, you would have cloth under here, but you can always take plastic, cover this area while you are continuing to build. So this needs to be firm to continue. It needs to be firm to beat. It needs to be semi-firm to stretch. And it needs to hold together, but you also can't let it totally firm up when you still have all this wet to put on. So we're going to keep this at leather hard. Wrap it up while you're still working. Now, because this is leather hard, what do I do for that first coil that's going on? I am going to slip and score. Slip and score for that first coil. And as usual, I am going to really be looking at my template and just making sure where that coil falls. And now that I really have a form going, I want to make sure like I don't adhere this at all until it's in place, and I'll go around every little bit. You should have been doing this the whole time. After those first few coils, you should have been placing your coils with the template like I am now, which is just every inch. Every inch. Okay. And now I know that I can keep going. When I go to put my next coil on, I will not have to slip and score. I will not have to slip and score. By the way, my inside is also cleaned. While I was still able to get in there, I did go in and I cleaned my inside. I don't want my viewer to see a junky inside, so I'm nice and smooth in there. All right, so here we are with a semi-symmetrical round form. I've used my template. There are definitely some areas that don't quite line up, but for the most part, not too bad. Notice that I have gone above where my top is. I did that because I want to actually come in and cut down. So once this is firmed up to more of a leather hard, if I want it to be straight, I'm going to take my clay shredder, because that's my favorite tool when I just need to shave things off. And I can come in and just shave off and then probably round off, unless you really want that blunted edge that the clay shredder is going to make. Or once it gets firmed up, if I wanted to do something fancy with my top, I can go in there and cut off. I don't want to cut that yet. I'm going to wait till it's firm. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and do my final clean up with my serrated rib. Then I'm going to come in with my metal rib that does not have teeth. If I am going to be putting more, if I'm going to be applying anything to this, so if I'm doing sprigging or if I'm making a face jug and putting a face on it, I am just going to smooth until my metal rib here. I'm not going to go more than that because I'm going to be adding to this and I'm going to be kind of making a mess again. So I'm only going to go to my metal rib if I still have additions to put onto this work. I am going to go through the entire cleanup process if I am going to sgraffito or if I am finished. So if I'm going to be carving, sgraffitoing, or I'm just making a form, I'm going to go, or even if I'm texturing, right? I'm going to go ahead and go through the next steps, which is going to be the sponge, the wet sponge, will take out anything that metal rib left behind. Now I haven't really gotten in here yet to really clean this up, you guys, but I want to quickly go through these steps. So the wet sponge, and then of course the rubber rib. That rubber rib is going to push back any grog that came out. And grog are those rocky looking things that are actually clay that's been smashed down and put back into your clay body. It's been taken to temperature and then crushed and then put in your clay body for strength. Okay. All right, so obviously I've got some problems down here. I'll get to that when you're not looking, but for the most part, you can see how nice and smooth that is. And I just want to remind you all of those, you know, the way this looked at the beginning, I told you to leave all that stuff. It's because it's just so fast to clean up. It's just so fast to clean up at the end. Okay. Now this is ready for slip if I'm going to be putting any decorating slip on it. And it's also ready for carving. I'd probably let it get a little bit firmer, especially on the top here. Hard leather, hard to carve. But it's ready for a face or sprigging or anything else that you're going to be adding to it. Just keep it at this state of clay. So that is how you follow a template and get the form exactly how you want it. Although you can do just a little bit better than this, right? I've got a few problems here, but for the most part, not too bad. Now you know, and once you've mastered how to actually follow a form, then you can start free forming, which is also a lot of fun. But you don't want to free form without knowing how to control the clay at the beginning. So as you can see with coiling, you're able to really control your form. We like to use coiling for organic work because you can get really nice curves and you can kind of get the clay to do whatever you want it to do. So that's the beauty of coiling. And now that you know how to use a template to control your form, you'll be able to make anything out of clay. Let's hope for that. Good luck, and I will see you next time.